Well, hello, Pat. Glad to be here with you today for Awee's webinar, The Human Side of Cybersecurity, Risks and Challenges in Dental Practices. I know it's been a long day for both of us, but excited to be here and sharing this content with our audience today.
Absolutely. Thank you, David, by the way, and it's nice to see you again tonight.
Good to see you as well. So let's take a moment and just give our audience a quick background on ourselves. So I'm David Monroe. I'm the CEO of Awee. I've spent about 2 decades in the information security and cybersecurity marketplace, and excited to be here today sharing our insights and perspective with the dental community in Ontario.
Thank you. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, my name's Patrick. I'm the CTO or the Chief Technology Officer, if you want, of Awee, a company based near Montreal that specializes in cybersecurity. And I've been working in cybersecurity for a little more than 30 years now. So a long, long time. At least I feel that it's been a very long time.
Well, they can tell by our little bit of gray hair here and there, Pat, that we've been doing this for a while.
Absolutely.
So, what we thought we would do today is to try and make this as meaningful as possible for our audience, is share a story that really kind of puts an exclamation mark on some of the challenges that dental practices face when it comes to cybersecurity. So, in conversations over the last number of weeks, I was brought up to speed on an issue that happened with a Canadian dental practice very recently. They had been going through a renovation, acquiring some new systems and diagnostic equipment in their office, and they had a relatively large bill that ultimately had to be settled. And they were waiting until they had final sign off from their practice owner before doing the transfer of funds. And when they were getting ready to do that transfer, unbeknownst to them, a digital hacker, a cyber criminal had set up shop in their digital network, and in fact was ultimately able to step in the middle of that financial transaction and siphon those funds off to the criminal's account. Now, unfortunately, that dental practice owner still has a bill to settle with their solution provider, but that $50,000 is gone. And at the heart of these challenges ultimately is this concept of human error being the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. And as the IBM statistic shows, over 90% of cyber breaches are typically caused by human error. So at Awee, and what we'll share today, are some of the initial thoughts and perspective and guidance that can help turn that weakest link into the first line of defense for a dental practice.
Absolutely. And we've had the chance to work with different dental practice over the years, and we learn a lot about them, but not just them. We also work with a lot of different businesses, and we've seen that the impact is very similar from one type of business to the other.
So why would cyber criminals target a dental practice? And I share that, Pat, because it really seems kind of counterintuitive. One of the things I hear often in the dental community is, well, gosh, they're probably going to be targeting much larger medical institutions, hospitals, um, organizations with maybe hundreds or thousands of employees and orders of magnitude more clients or more patients than a dental practice. So why are cyber criminals really targeting dental practices?
And that's a pretty good question. And by the way, we also hear things like, oh, you know what, we're not a bank or we're not NASA. So why would somebody want to target us? And it's kind of true in a sense that you would think the cyber criminal would focus where there's a lot of money. But on the other end, they can make money with pretty much everything everywhere nowadays. So if we look at the first reason here, monetary reason, well, guess what? This is the first or the main reason for pretty much any attack nowadays. It could also be revenge or some other methods or some other reason that they want to attack you, but money is still number one. And anything healthcare related is always seen as rich in exploitable data. What I mean by that, and it's very simple, is that all the patient data, all the information contained in those databases is valuable for the bad guys. What they can do is they can steal it, they can copy it, extract it, send it somewhere in their own environment, and then sell it piece by piece or as a whole on what we call the dark web. So the dark web is the some connection through the internet that is not known by Google or by the big search engine. So you cannot just use Google to search it and say, oh, I want to buy patient data, for example. But there are places that are very well hidden on the internet that can contain and are specialized in selling this type of information. So one of the main reasons for the bad guys to attack you is just to steal that information. The
And
second reason, and you see it there, is that small businesses and dental practices are considered in most cases as very small businesses, are looked at as easy target for the bad guys, mostly because you don't have a ton of money to invest in cybersecurity, but also most of you do not have even a full-time IT person. So that means that if the bad guys get into the system and they're allowed to install, a software or a piece of malware on a computer, they can use it for sometime weeks or months before it is even being discovered or you even know that there's something wrong. And they use that time to, again, take a look at what you're doing, the way you're doing it, and then possibly just stealing information or maybe stealing money, as the example that David gave a little bit earlier.
I suspect, Pat, many in our audience don't recognize or realize how valuable each of those pieces of information could be, whether it's a health card number or a credit card number or your home address. All of these individual pieces of information change hands for a considerable amount of money. So when you're talking about hundreds or thousands of patients in a mid-sized dental practice, that can become a lot of money.
Absolutely. Just consider this. Let's say that one patient information, like their address and uh, Medicare number is worth $50 on the dark web. Well, if you have 20,000 patients in your database, that's worth close to $1 million to a bad guy. So it's a lot of money for them. And I'm not necessarily exaggerating here by $50 for patient information. Sometimes it can go as high as $100, $125. And we're talking real dollars here, like American dollars. Obviously, in Canada, we would consider that also a lot of money. But imagine that they can sell that for a lot of Bitcoins exchange again in American dollars.
So the bad guys, when they see an independent dental practice that, as you mentioned, may not have the resources and the infrastructure in place to protect themselves, they're really seen as an easy mark and an opportunity to see dollar signs in their eyes.
Unfortunately, that's totally true. And the best thing we can do is to protect ourselves. And I think we'll touch that a little later in that webinar.
Absolutely. So how do criminals potentially gain digital access to a dental practice? Because again, this starts to get to the heart of people don't know what they don't know. And they're not exactly sure how they're going to infiltrate their systems. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how these criminals gain access to a dental practice.
That's a great question too, because again, as you just mentioned, most people are not even aware of all the different methods that the bad guys can use to get access. And some of them are very simple and very easy. The first one is just on the phone. They call you, they pretend to be somebody from, example, Microsoft or a big software company somewhere, and they say, oh, you know what, we just noticed a problem on your computer. Can you go to that website and can you install that piece of software? And bingo, after 2-3 minutes talking to you over the phone or talking to one of your employees, they, through that software, have total access to that computer And from that computer, they can just jump from it to another one, etc., and start installing backdoors if you want in your infrastructure. Those backdoors will give them access at any time they want. And this is just one example through the phone. I was just reading a pretty good article just about 3 days ago on a fairly good documented or very well documented example of exactly just like that. And the person that was answering the phone is a cybersecurity expert. And the thing is, the fraud was done so properly and so digitally proper that he didn't even notice anything wrong at first. It took him a few minutes to figure out that this was probably a fraud and this was something bad going on. So the phone portion is just one way to do it. Email is another very, very easy way to infiltrate a computer. If you think about it, you all receive probably tens, if not hundreds of emails every week. In most
Right.
of these emails, there's probably some information being sent to you, but also sometimes links to other type of information. So for example, somebody's sending you a contract to sign, and what will happen is that in that email, you'll get uh, a button or maybe a direct link that says, click here to go and sign the contract. If you're expecting a contract to come through email, you won't think about it. And if you just click on that link, you might inadvertently be sent to a different website than the one you expect to go to. And that website can ask you for a series of information about yourself. So, for example, your name, your password, etc. And that information can give the bad guys access. But worse than that, some of these websites are also used to distribute malware. So that means that when you click on that link, as soon as that new or fake website loads into your browser, then something bad is going on in the background and some malware is being installed automatically without your knowledge and without your consent. So be very, very careful before clicking on any link. And that's the an advice we give to all of our customers. If
And
you
there
think
seems
about text message, sorry, David, text message is pretty much the same way. You can receive a bad text message and just by clicking on it being infected.
And there seems to be across all different mediums where they try to gain access is there's a common theme. They try to create a sense of urgency. They try to raise the profile of a challenge or an issue to get people to make decisions in rapid fire and in a high stress environment, don't they? To try and manipulate them.
Absolutely. And you know, just a few years ago, those emails were fairly bad, were not very good or well done. But nowadays, the bad guys got a lot more experience with AI. They can also craft those emails to be
Uh,
very, very realistic. And you won't even see the difference between a real or a bad email. So be very wary about that. But we're just talking about emails. Let's
right?
talk about in person. Somebody goes to your practice and asks you, for example, to plug in a USB drive, you know, those little thumb drive that you can buy at Best Buy or pretty much
Yes.
anywhere, even at your pharmacy.
Hmm.
The thing is, those thumb drive can contain also a piece of malware. There are some thumb drive that you can buy on the internet. And I'm not talking the dark web in this case, I'm talking on the real internet, where you can go and for $50, you can buy a thumb drive that already has some malware in it that will give you control and full control of any computer that you plug it in. So again, that's a different thing. Be careful before you plug in anything into one of your computer. It doesn't matter which type of computer. Some people may think, oh, you know what? I've got Macintosh or maybe I've got a Unix machine. It does not matter. Those smart drives are smart enough to figure out which type of computers you have, which version of Windows, which type of software to infiltrate the computer using the vulnerabilities built in there.
Now I see through technology, Pat, and I remember at a dental conference I was at not too long ago, where a story was being shared of a dental practice that, again, not knowing what they don't know, had purchased a firewall, had implemented that firewall, but were not understanding the complexity of configuration and thinking that they were protected when in fact they weren't.
And that's true. Technology, if you think about it, is getting very, very complex. And that's why there are IT people who specialize just in that. And if you think about cybersecurity, that's one more step where you're getting more complexity inside your environment. And that complexity brings different vulnerabilities. So, for example, as you mentioned, deploying a piece of software, even if it's like an imagery software, for example, if you don't configure it properly or if it's not kept up to date, can allow possibly a bad guy to take control of that computer and again extract information without your knowledge. You have to be very, very careful and update those software on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Now, there are many different types of threats, and we have a limited amount of time today to try and share some insights and perspective. But maybe we could talk and focus on what you think are the top three cyber risks or threats that dental practices may be um, subjected to.
And that's a great insight to our next slide right here. So technically, if you think about it, again, dental practices, as I mentioned earlier, pretty much every small businesses here in Canada or in North America in general face pretty much the same top three cyber risk. The first one is, as we see here, cyber fraud. So people getting into, or bad guys again, getting into your network or your computer environment and using those computers to transfer money. If you think about it nowadays, you do your online banking all the time. And most of the time, I'm guessing from one or maybe two computers.
Uh,
If
I
your
was
patience,
I
no,
was doing some today, Pat.
and I do some pretty much every day also. But if you think about it, by using those computers to be able to transfer money or to be able to receive funds, from example, from your clients or your patients paying their bills, if somebody is able to get into that computer and maybe redirect those funds somewhere else, you might not find out right away. And we've seen that happen to some dental practices around the country, I guess, mostly in the past year and a half or so, where the, the cyber criminals really are able to redirect different type of funds coming from insurance company, coming from the patients themselves, or just by being able to access your bank account and just transferring the money anywhere else. Those are all called cyber fraud. And at this point, the only or the best protection, if you want, is to make sure that nobody can get access to that computer. So adding different protection and controls, and we'll talk about that a little later. The second obvious risk is ransomware. You've probably all heard of ransomware, and you probably already know one, two, maybe more victims of ransomware.
It reminds me of something I learned a long time ago. And someone had said on a cast for the news during a downturn in the economy that when your neighbor loses their job, it's a recession. When you lose your job, it's a depression. So it kind of puts things in perspective. And what I've seen in the last 12 or 18 months is this concept of ransomware getting closer and closer to each of us as an individual. So, a year and a half ago, I didn't know anybody who had been personally affected. In the last 12 months, a very close business associate who runs a small recruiting practice had his computer locked up and was not able to access his computer to run his business. And my 79-year-old mother had her laptop locked up by a ransomware attack. So it's
Mhm.
getting closer and closer to all of us, and it really is becoming really pervasive.
Absolutely. And the bad guys like that method because it's very easy for them to find where all your data is stored. It can be on one computer, it can be a central database somewhere, it can be on a main computer. But at the end, they find that. And when they find it, they just either encrypt it or make it unavailable for you until you pay the ransom.
Hmm.
The only way to get it back is either to pay the ransom or have some very, very good backups. And again, we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
And if you pay the ransom, you're still not guaranteed that what they've gotten access to hasn't been sold on the dark web also.
That's absolutely true. I mean, that data can still be exfiltrated. And that's point number three. Even though you're victim of ransomware, they can also exfiltrate the data and try to sell it on the dark web also. So not only do you have to pay to try to get it back, but you might have to pay a second time not to get it posted if you want on the dark web, which is pretty bad. And about 10 years ago, the first few ransomwares, or maybe 12 years ago, the first few ransomwares were very, I would say, easy to use, but the bad guys were not asking for a lot of money, sometimes 300, 400, maybe $500. Nowadays, they're asking like $50,000, 100, $200,000 or more. I was
Hmm.
at a company not too long ago, and the ransom being asked was about $7 million. In their case, they were a little bigger business than what you would expect in a dental practice, but
Sure.
still, $7 million is a lot of money for even a larger company. So you need to think about it before you pay it.
And in the context of dental practices, what the cyber criminals are really hoping for is to engage with a dental practice owner who's a very reputable business person running a service in their community, and they want to try and make this go away as quickly as possible. So they're
Absolutely.
seen as an individual or a small business that's going to do everything they can, pay their ransom, do whatever it takes to get their business back and operational.
Yeah, and imagine that somebody has encrypted all of your data. You cannot access it. So that means you cannot talk to patients anymore because you don't know whose appointment is coming up and
Right.
which patient is supposed to come, for example, tomorrow or the day after. On top of that, your equipment stops working because most of your equipment nowadays is digital. So that means it needs a computer to run. And if your data is encrypted, you cannot make those devices run properly. So that means your whole clinic might be stopped for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 6 weeks. So imagine not being able to do business for 6 weeks in a row. That can certainly put you down for a while.
Well, and I think that leads us into another key question on this topic, and that's really how do cyber breaches impact not only the owners, which most people would think is the primary challenge or issue that the owner of the dental practice is going to be impacted, but at the end of the day, it has a profound impact on not only the dental practice owners, but their employees, and as an extension, also their patients.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into that question because if you think about it, normally the first thing we think is, oh, shoot, my practice is them. How am I going to be able to do business? But if you think about it, the patients are being impacted by that too, because some of them might be suffering, or some of them were really expecting to have that appointment at that time. And now you're not able to help them and you're not able to serve them. Some of them might decide that they're going to go elsewhere, and that's going to be a big hit for the practice. But it can also impact employees, and I think you wrote a pretty good paper on that not too long ago, David.
Well, absolutely. And that reputational harm is sometimes the most challenging to recover from. It's one thing to get a system up and running again, but somebody's observation of the fact that they couldn't get their dental treatment done when they needed it, or their own data, now that maybe when they go home, they're worried that they may get targeted because some of their data may have been breached as part of that cyber incident at that dental practice.
Yep. And that can lead to lawsuits, as we see here on the
Sure.
screen. And I've seen and especially in different businesses, not necessarily in dental practices themselves, but I've seen customers sue their supplier in this case because, again, their own personal data was lost or is being used against them. And they want to make sure that they can get some money back from whoever did not protect that data properly or lost it. And if you look at it from a totally different angle, most countries around the world, including Canada, and also a lot of different provinces have built different laws and regulation now in order to protect either patient data or personal information.
Right.
And that means that from a regulatory perspective, you are liable for that information if you do not protect it properly. If that data is being stolen or misused, technically you are responsible for that. And I'm sure that some of you may think, oh, you know what? That data is protected in the software that we use. Our software provider is telling us that there's no way that the data can be used outside of the software, but it's not always true. Make sure that you can verify that. And it's not because the software company says so that you are not liable for that data.
Now, the employees, they seem to be sitting in the middle of this sandwich, if you will, between the dental practice owner and the patients. The impacts on the patients and the dental practice owners seems very easily understood. But for the employees, there are extenuating circumstances around stress, aren't there? Or maybe their liability if they were the ones handling data or not using a security tool in the right fashion.
Absolutely. And I think I would be stressed if I did something or if I think I did something that could put the business in jeopardy. So imagine any of your staff or employees that could possibly have made some kind of a mistake or maybe allowed the bad guys to come into your environment. They might be very, very stressed about that. But even if they didn't do anything wrong, they might still think about, am I going to lose my job? Is something going to happen to the practice where I won't be able to work and maybe feed my children or do whatever I need to do or pay my bills? So that could be pretty stressful for them also.
Oh, absolutely, it could. So now we start to talk a little bit about how can organizations protect themselves. And every dental practice has general insurance. But let's talk a little bit about why cyber insurance is such a critical component when addressing the potential for cyber breaches and the impact they can have on a dental practice.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think every dental practice around the country is protected by a general insurance, by a malpractice insurance. But most of you are probably not even aware that there is, I should say, such a thing as a cyber insurance. And a cyber insurance, as the name implies, is a special type of insurance that focuses only and only on cyber risk. So the goal is to protect you against fraud or cyber attack in general.
The cyber insurer is going to look for some qualification, I guess, of a dental practice to be able to secure cybersecurity insurance. Not every dental practice is going to be able to secure it. There's some minimums that they're going to have to be able to demonstrate to an insurer to be able to qualify for that cybersecurity insurance, isn't there?
Absolutely, you're totally right, and this is a great point that you need to focus on and you need to understand. So just like a general insurance is going to ask you, for example, to do some basic stuff in order to protect your business and to protect yourself, it's the same thing with a cyber insurance. The five top requirements that we see pretty much every cyber insurer ask their customers are the ones we see here on the screen. The first one is immutable backups. So an immutable backup, as the name implies, is a backup of all of your data, but that is written in a fashion that cannot be modified even by the bad guys or even by yourself within a certain amount of time. So for example, you take a backup of your data, it's written somewhere, but you cannot overwrite it, delete it, destroy it for at least 60 days. So this way, if something happens within those 60 days, you can always go back to that data. So in case of ransomware attack, as we mentioned earlier, that is probably one of your best protection. That's why cyber insurer asks you about that.
So it's a little bit like an arms race, isn't it? The bad guys figured out, dental practices doing a backup, and they figure out a way to get into that backup and to diminish its ability to help that dental practice get back up and running. So now there's a requirement for an immutable backup so that it can't be impacted for those 60 days. So it's there to help you get back up on your feet and running again.
Absolutely. And if you use those backups on a regular basis, so for example, once a day, once a week, even though it's an immutable backup, you can always, again, keep that copy for 30, 45, 60 days or whatever amount of time is necessary in your policy or you deem necessary for your practice. Next is the second thing that we see there, which is called an advanced protection on device, or in our world, we call that an EDR, or endpoint detection and response. So it's a little bit like an antivirus, but on steroid. What it does is it looks at the behavior of pretty much all the software that is running and what the users are doing on your computer. And if it finds anything that looks suspicious, any call, for example, to a system or to an application that your users do not normally do, it might stop it, or it can stop it in its track. So that is very, very useful to stop malware like viruses and ransomware also before it goes too deep and it encrypts all the data. The third thing is patch, or what we call patch management, or basically updates your application. So if you can update your application on a regular basis, that is a very, very good thing. And again, the bad guys know that software sometimes contains vulnerabilities, so they want to exploit known vulnerabilities. So something, for example, that only exists in an old version of Windows. If you don't upgrade your Windows systems, guess what? You can be a victim of one of those vulnerabilities and they can enter your system through it.
And for those in our audience who aren't super technical, this is just very similar to our smartphones having regular backups that are fixing bugs or areas of concern within the operating system that may provide for an attack surface. And they're constantly updating that software so that when you update your iPhone or your Android, it's patching those things. And this is very similar, and it's being done on the infrastructure that's supporting your practice.
Absolutely. And a little bit like you do on your car, you change your tire on a regular basis. Well, upgrading and updating your system is something that you need to do too. So keeping your system up to date is one of the easiest things that you can do in your environment in order to keep the bad guys out.
Now, multi-factor authentication, that's near and dear to both our hearts. Having worked at RSA, the inventors of that small device that provided the 6-digit code that was constantly resetting and was the beginning of that multi-factor authentication marketplace, that still really is a very critical component to this kind of infrastructure to protect yourself and to demonstrate to a cyber insurer that you're doing the fundamental things that are necessary to protect your practice.
Absolutely. And you're totally right. So we both had the chance to work for a large US company called RSA that invented a technology that allows you to prove who you say you are by carrying with you a small token, and that token would display 6 digits that would change every minute or so. Now, this was the original form of what we call a multi-factor authentication. There are different other forms that exist today. But the thing is, your insurer is asking you to do something like that, mostly for any application that can be reached from the internet. So if you think about your email address, You might say, oh, I'm using Gmail, or maybe I'm using Yahoo, or I'm using Bell email address, or TELUS. It does not really matter. Your email addresses can be used to cause a lot of trouble and different fraud. So, for example, when you receive funds from your customers, maybe an Interact fund transfer, you probably use an email address to receive those fund transfers. If somebody can get into that email address or that email server on your behalf, they can probably rewire the money somewhere else. So that's why the insurers are asking you to protect any applications like emails, again, that you reach out from the internet with a multi-factor authentication. Most providers like Gmail, again, Yahoo, etc., allow you to do that. When you go in your settings and you verify your own account, you can say, I want to be able to prove that I am the real person who owns that email address. And you can set up, for example, your phone to be able to receive a code every time you log in from a new computer. So this way, if somebody tries to use that email address on a totally different computer, you would receive that text message on your smartphone. And if you do not give that text message or that code, if you want, to the bad guys, then your account is safe. It is protected with what we call multi-factor authentication.
Excellent. And now the fifth one, and this really kind of gets to the core of what we do at Awee, from an awareness education perspective. Let's talk a little bit about why that employee training layer is so critical to being able to demonstrate competence to a cyber insurer.
Absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, 90% of fraud or, data breaches come from human errors. And most of the time, those human errors are performed because you just don't know what you don't know. You don't know that somebody can attack you using this form of attack. So, for example, can somebody get into your computer through the Wi-Fi system? Absolutely. But if you don't know that and you don't know how to protect yourself, then you might be an easier victim than somebody who knows about that and knows how to protect it. And that's why employee training, what we call awareness, is crucial in order to protect the organization because, again, most of the bad guys will try to get into your system through your users.
And this fifth point starts to get to the heart of that, turning that weakest link into that first line of defense.
Absolutely. Your users are the ones who are facing your customers, your clients, your patients. So by facing them and exchanging information with them all the time, they expect sometimes to receive information from patients, from possible customers, maybe also from suppliers. So again, if they don't know how the bad guys can use that to attack them, then they won't be necessarily wary about it.
So really, this starts to get to the heart of, we're kind of walking around the topic right now, and now we're really starting to get to that bullseye. So for the dental practice owners and the office administrators that are watching our webinar today, let's talk a little bit about how you can really take those proactive steps to protect your dental clinic.
And that's a great point. We talked about different things. Some of it was technology wise, and some of it was mostly geared towards the user themselves. But if you think about it, most of you have, as a dental practice owner, is using some kind of IT service on the outside. So continue trusting that IT service provider because most of the time they know what they're doing, but take the time to challenge them a little bit. What that means is that you just learn about different things that you need to do, like immutable backups, like EDR, like MFA for multi-factor authentication. So take the time to ask them about that and what they're doing to help you put that in place, or maybe to make sure that your system is secure. What you can also do is maybe find a good independent cybersecurity expert, somebody who will act as a trusted advisor and maybe help you challenge those IT providers for you, or maybe validate that what they're telling you is true. And again, it's not because you shouldn't trust them. Most of them know exactly what they're doing and they're doing the right thing. And they're probably already putting those controls in place to help you protect your business. But if it's not the case, you need to know about it and you need to know about it as soon as possible and not later.
So when we talk about the IT provider, the first kind of telltale sign that maybe something might be a little bit amiss is if, as a dental practice owner, you're not getting proactive information from your IT provider suggesting we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to protect ourselves in this fashion. So, this is a great starting point for a dental practice owner to take some of the content from today's webinar and start just basically asking questions. So,
Mhm.
do I have an immutable backup in place? How do I integrate multi-factor authentication into our technical infrastructure at the practice?
And is it relevant? Because sometimes, and again, I don't want to put it in a bad context, but sometimes it might not be relevant either.
Sure.
Each practice is probably different and or is very different, I should say. And you're using sometimes tools that cannot sometimes accommodate those technology, but some other times should absolutely have it, and you might not even know about it.
Now, when it comes to cyber insurance, sometimes there's a bit of a challenge in that individuals may think that their general insurance is providing some level of protection against this kind of an attack or a breach. But that's typically not the case, or it's at a very small dollar amount. So it really is critical to engage with an insurance organization that has cyber specific insurance uh, products and offerings.
Absolutely, you're totally right. And I was talking to an insurance broker about 3 hours ago. I know it probably won't mean much to most people, but one of the things that that insurance broker told me is that some of their customers do not have right now a cyber insurance. And again, like you just said, they think that they're covered. But at the end, the coverage is only for the first $2,000. So guess what? If you're a victim of a fraud of $50,000, only the first 2,000 is covered by your insurance policy. That means you still need to pay $48,000 out of your own pocket. So that could be very challenging also.
Absolutely. So now we really get to the heart, Pat, of how we can protect a dental practice and starting to turn that weakest link on its head and turning it into that first line of defense that everybody wants to change those statistics that we see from IBM and others, where 90% of cyber breaches simply are focused on a human error. Let's turn that on its head and turn that around and make that the first line of defense.
And that's a great way to talk about what we do at Awee. So the question basically, as you just said, is why should I invest in cybersecurity awareness education? Well, guess what? As we just mentioned, this again is the first line of defense, and you mentioned it a few times already. And we know that dental practice owners and all the employees are extremely busy. We know we have all 10,000 things to do during the day. There's no time really to say, oh, you know what? Let's take maybe an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, or 10 hours to get trained in cybersecurity. So, because most breaches are due to human error, as you mentioned, and because there's a lack of time, what we think is that cybersecurity education should be very, very one easy to understand, but it should also be short. For example, only a few minutes, maybe once a month, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes per month, and this way people can learn on an ongoing cadence and be more prepared about what's going on.
Yeah, one of the hard truths in cybersecurity awareness is that despite the literally the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent over the last 10 or 15 years globally on cyber awareness education, it hasn't moved the needle. that 90% plus of cyber breaches that involve human error hasn't changed over the last 10 or 15 years. So the traditional approach to training has really just checked a box to say, yes, we've trained our people, but has it really sunk in? The average person doesn't really connect with the esoteric nature of cybersecurity. It's not something that's, part and parcel of their day every day. So I know that in your journey with Awee, you really started this investigation engaging with the Human Behavioral Psychology Department at the University of Laval to try and create a secret sauce, if you will, to get the average layperson to engage in a meaningful way with content that will start to turn that weakest link into that first line of defense. And what we've learned is that there's some really critical pieces of the puzzle that, if done properly, really changes how people learn about cybersecurity awareness.
You're totally right. And part of that, and at least in what we saw so far, is, as I mentioned, something like very, very short content. So not trying to complicate things, sorry, over and make it
Overcomplicate.
overcomplicate, absolutely, and try to make it so easy to understand that uh, people without any technical background can really understand it fairly easily. And by making it short, also, like I said, not only do they not lose a lot of time spending trying to learn something that is not necessarily their main business or their main background, but they can also focus on what's really important in the message. And on the top of that, and something that you keep mentioning to pretty much everybody we meet, is that the ongoing cadence allows the user to learn bit by bit, so bite size learning, but also allow us to add new content as soon as a new type of fraud or new type of cyber attack comes up. Then we can inject that information directly into the training. So this way people are aware of it very, very quickly. So they're more um, easy, if you want. It's easier for them to protect themselves, but to be aware of all of these threats.
So I know we've only got about 10 minutes left here, but one of the core fundamental pieces of Awee's approach to cyber awareness education is um, this ability to consume short snippets of information. And just before we jump to this slide, would it be possible to just bring up a quick video to give our audience an idea of what this differentiated approach to cyber education looks like? And the videos are typically 1:30 to 2 minutes long. I think we've got the time to just share one video if that's possible.
That's a great idea. So let's take the next maybe minute and a half or 2 minutes, as you said, to take a look at this quick video, and we'll talk about it right after that.
The Mozza Cafe is very popular among the Mousetown citizens. Junior is probably one of their most loyal customers. Lost in his thoughts, he doesn't notice the small truck parked in front of the cafe, from which a suspicious figure emerges. Oh, the sneaky bandit is setting up a fake Wi-Fi router. This kind of device is used to create a fake internet network, similar to those being offered in most public places. Using that, cyber criminals can easily steal the personal information of anyone that connects to their dummy network. This form of attack is known as the evil twin. Oblivious to the threat, Junior is awaiting his order and, just like every other client, is about to use his phone. But Junior is a very smart and cautious mouse. The evil twin is a malicious Wi-Fi network that disguised itself as a legitimate one. Deliberately deceptive, the network often uses a name in relation to the place where you currently are, or else simply appears as the strongest network available, fooling the client in a hurry, even more so if the auto-join option on your device is activated. The best protection against the evil twin is to ask an employee the name of their Wi-Fi network, especially if you notice two networks with similar names. And make sure that the auto-join functionality on your device is turned off at all times. Be very careful, and cyber criminals will have to be very sneaky before you fall into their claw.
So now that you've seen that video, again, remember that this message is fairly easy to learn. Hopefully you all learned something in that small excerpt of video that we have. And it will bring us to this subject that we see here about what should I do if my dental practice is a victim of cyber attack. Have you seen practices that have been victim of cyber attack, David?
I have. And the most prevalent question that I've seen people struggle with is, once I've identified that an attack has taken place, what do I do? It's the first time it's happened to me. And I love that first bullet point there, Pat, because I think this is critical in so many things in life. There's lots of stressful in situations we get ourselves involved in, both professionally and personally. And that first instinct sometimes is to, fight or flight. And to not panic is so critical. To take a deep breath, think about what's going on, and then start to put a plan in place that you can execute just one step at a time. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Absolutely. And you're totally right. In not just in cyber attacks, but pretty much anywhere in life, panicking is probably the worst thing that you can do. Because if you panic, if you do the wrong thing, it can have a negative impact in the short term, but maybe even in the long term in your business. So let's step back for a few seconds, like you said, take a deep breath, and let's think about it. Now, normally, if you really think you are a victim of cyber attack, again, maybe the first thing to do instead, after not panicking, is to reach out to your IT partner and ask them if they are aware of anything going on in your environment and if they can help you somehow. If you think your IT partner cannot help you, then having a cybersecurity specialist helping you might be something good also. There's a lot of different pretty good companies around Canada that can really help, and they have sometimes even a toll-free number that you can call 24/7 in order to help you if something is going on. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about cyber insurance, and your insurance broker, if you have a cyber policy, can really help you too. If you call your insurance broker, normally they have a whole list of things that they can do to help you, and they can even send specialists to your site in order to help you get out of this mess.
Yeah, the priority there is, once it's happened, how do we mitigate it? How do we minimize it? How do we get back to normal operations as quickly as possible? And that cyber security insurance and the resources that are going to come along with it are going to be a critical piece of that equation.
Absolutely. And minimizing the impact, as you just said, is probably step number one. You want to make sure that you're not going to be impacted for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. If you can limit the impact to maybe a few minutes or a few hours, that's probably the best thing that can happen to you, because being down, like I said earlier, for 6 weeks can really put a business down in the long run.
And then, of course, that last point, it may seem simple and straightforward, but often can be overlooked. You really should reach out to your local or provincial police, whoever has jurisdiction where your practice is operating, and get on the record that something has transpired, and make local police aware of the situation.
Absolutely. And by the way, this is something that your insurance broker is going to ask you for. And if you are regulated from either federal perspective or, again, a provincial perspective, for example, if you're located in Ontario or Quebec or anywhere else, you might be liable by some laws and regulation. And calling the police and having a police report is going to be probably the first thing that those regulators are going to ask you. So even if you're not 100% sure, at least calling them and making sure that they're aware that there's something going on can help you and can help them for the investigation. Because guess what? If, again, you're victim of a fraud, you might not be the only victim of that fraud. And having the police involved might help them really find the culprit and maybe get your money back if that's the case.
Now, we just have a couple of minutes left, but I know we've got a couple of slides that we want to go through. Now, these frequently asked questions, we wanted to take a minute and just kind of focus on those, because these are things that we hear constantly throughout our travels and our conversations with dental practice owners when we get involved in talking about cybersecurity awareness and protecting their practices. So the first one is, can or should learners binge watch the content? Well, part of how we've designed the Awee platform, Lumi, is through what we've learned from the University of Laval. And the best way to engage an audience in a subject matter that isn't really front and center in their lives is to drip that content to them regularly over a protracted period of time. And that's how we set out our curriculum within the Lumi platform, so that people are connecting with, 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes of content a month, but there's that constant drip of content throughout the year. And one of the things that really that helps in point number 3 is this year-round training cadence has an additional benefit, so that when there is a new threat, we can actually insert new content in real time, where traditional approaches to this kind of training didn't typically provide that. It was a one and done at one point each year. So if you were getting trained in October and a new threat came along in November, you may be waiting 11 months to get trained on how to protect yourself. Why is a cyber score important? Well, when any of us go to a financial institution to negotiate a loan, the first thing they look at is a credit score. So within the Lumi platform, as you saw, there is a cyber score that's like a credit score. So it provides deep analytical insights and perspective on the human behavioral risk profile of an individual based on how they're learning, what they know, what they don't know, and really provides that added level of insight. And you would have also seen that there's a great deal of animation in our platform. And again, that was very deliberate, not only to be culturally agnostic on a global basis so that the content will resonate with any audience, but also because that animated approach really gets people to sit up and they get wide-eyed and they start to consume that content because it's in a fun, friendly, engaging environment.
Absolutely. And having animation also, I don't know of anybody who doesn't like animated characters or cannot even learn from that.
I was a big Looney Tunes fan growing up.
So was I, by the way.
So the last thing we wanted to share with our audience is, if you've enjoyed this content, if it's resonated with you, if protecting your practice more effectively is something that's of interest, please come and visit us at info@awee.tech or at www.awee.tech. Check out our managed solution packages. One of the things we learned is that your dental practices are so busy. So we do all the heavy lifting. We provide our training in an environment where we set up your users. We deliver the reports each month so that your office administrator isn't labored with additional responsibilities. We become a virtual extension of your dental practice for your cybersecurity training needs. And because you've joined us through our relationship with the ODA, we're providing a 20% discount at checkout to any dental practice that wants to take advantage of the Awee Lumi cybersecurity awareness training platform. So lastly, Pat and I would both like to thank you for your time today and joining us.
Absolutely. It was a great pleasure talking to you all. And hopefully you learned something today and you'll be able to use what we told you in order to protect your practice.